My name is Jennifer Walsh, 31 years old. The moment that changed everything arrived wrapped in pink paper with delicate silver butterflies, the kind of card that pretends to hold love but hides poison. On my 31st birthday, at the center of a crowded restaurant, my mother-in-law, Margaret, handed me that envelope with a smile stretched so tight it looked like a mask. She said, "From all of us," her voice pitched high enough for the whole room to hear. My husband David angled his phone to record my face. Emma, his sister, lifted hers too. I hadn't yet opened the envelope, but my stomach knew before my eyes did. Inside waited divorce papers. But to understand the sting of that night, you need to know the days leading up to it. Because Margaret's cruelty didn't erupt suddenly. It brewed like bitter tea, steeping in silence until it was strong enough to burn. 3 days before my birthday, I padded into the kitchen early, hair still tangled from sleep, planning nothing more ambitious than a pot of coffee before my shift at Romano's. The house was quiet, hushed. In that way mornings sometimes are when the world hasn't fully woken. I expected emptiness, the comforting rattle of the coffee maker, maybe the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Instead, I found Margaret at the table, glasses perched on her nose, hunched over a spread of papers. Official looking, stamped and stiff. She didn't notice me at first. Her lips moved as she read, eyes sharp, and in one hand she held a red pen that flicked across the margins with neat cutting strokes. She looked less like a grandmother reviewing bills and more like a general marking battle plans. The intensity was unsettling. I shifted my weight, the floorboard under my heel groaning with betrayal. Her head jerked up. For a fraction of a second, her face was unguarded, and I saw something I had never seen in her before. Not the usual disapproval, not the cool disdain, but satisfaction. Real, dark satisfaction. In a blink, it was gone. "Oh, good morning, dear," she said, gathering the papers with surprising speed, stacking them, folding them, sliding them into an envelope so beautiful it almost mocked me. Pale pink, silver lettering, spelling happy birthday, butterflies prancing along the edges. She smoothed her hand across it, her smile stretching wider. "Just some family paperwork," she explained. Her tone carried false lightness, like a bad actress rehearsing lines. "Nothing for you to worry about." I stood there, the air between us heavy with something unspoken. Margaret had never called me dear. She usually avoided my name altogether, referring to me as David's wife, or in crueler moments, simply she. The sudden affection felt wrong, as though she were trying on the word before discarding it forever. I managed a polite smile, moved toward the coffee maker. The smell of grounds blooming in hot water usually comforted me, but that morning the kitchen felt colder, sharper. "Need help with those papers?" I asked casually, hoping my voice didn't betray my nerves. Her laugh was airy, a strange sound in her mouth. "Oh, this is something special, something I've been working on for quite some time. Even David doesn't know." Her secrecy pricked my curiosity. In 2 years of marriage, Margaret had never once shown interest in planning surprises, certainly not for me. She was a woman of practicality, gifts chosen with efficiency rather than thought. That she was crafting something elaborate, something just for my birthday, felt almost hopeful. "It's something that will change everything," she said, sliding the decorated envelope into her purse like a treasure. Her eyes caught mine and lingered, and for a fleeting moment I believed she was trying to bridge the chasm between us. Maybe, I thought, she's finally seen me. When David walked into the kitchen moments later, dressed for work, he kissed my cheek as usual, but then he looked at his mother. A look so brief it might have passed unnoticed if I hadn't been searching for signs. Something flickered between them. Communication without words. When I asked what it meant, David only smiled. "We're planning something special for your birthday." That week, Margaret's demeanor shifted entirely. She phoned me twice, her voice almost warm, making sure I was available for dinner on my birthday. She suggested Romano's, the restaurant where I worked shifts, the one she usually dismissed with curled lips and excuses. "It's important we acknowledge all aspects of your life," she said. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they lodged uneasily under my skin. Margaret didn't speak in the language of sentiment. She had spent years erasing my presence from family introductions, redirecting conversations when my job came up. Why now? Why this sudden interest in my life? Still, a small flame of hope flickered. Could this dinner mean acceptance at last? Emma, who usually avoided family dinners that involved me, suddenly became enthusiastic. "I'll help with arrangements," she chirped. Her smile looked too knowing, too staged, but I swallowed my doubts. I wanted so badly to believe. David seemed buoyed by anticipation, checking his phone often, replying to texts with secretive grins. When I leaned over to peek, he tilted the screen away playfully. "Surprise business," he teased. The night before my birthday, Margaret called again. "Wear something nice," she advised, her voice coated in sugar, "but nothing too formal. You'll want to be comfortable for what we have planned." Her tone was filled with anticipation, and I mistook it for affection. I stood in front of my closet for an hour, finally settling on a navy dress. Professional, yet soft, approachable, yet elegant. I wanted everything about me to whisper worthy. In the mirror, I saw a woman smoothing wrinkles with trembling hands, trying desperately to belong to a family that never let her in. Later that night, David held me unusually close. His whispers tickled my hairline. "Tomorrow will be a day you'll never forget," he said. His intensity felt like love. I thought he was promising me acceptance. I had no idea it was a goodbye. As I drifted to sleep, Margaret's purse sat downstairs, heavy with an envelope dressed in pink butterflies. She was likely rehearsing the speech she'd deliver. Meanwhile, I dreamed of finally being welcomed, finally being enough. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the curtains, gilding the ordinary in hope. I believed my 31st birthday would mark my place in David's family. Instead, it would become the day Margaret gave me the greatest gift of my life, freedom. If the decorated envelope was the strike of the sword, then the years before were the sharpening of its blade. Margaret's campaign against me didn't begin on my birthday. It began the very first time I stepped into David's family circle after our wedding. It was his cousin Michael's graduation party, a warm June evening, filled with chatter, champagne glasses clinking, and the faint strains of piano music from the rented hall. I had taken hours to prepare, choosing a black dress simple enough to avoid scrutiny, pairing it with minimal jewelry. I told myself that if I blended in quietly, if I made no missteps, they would accept me. But Margaret made sure blending in wasn't an option. "This is David's wife," she said, her voice carrying across a cluster of well-dressed women. "She works in the service industry." She paused just long enough for the words to land, for raised brows to lift, for a cousin's sympathetic "oh" to sound more like pity than greeting. Patricia, one of the aunts, tilted her head. "How interesting," she murmured, her smile a thin line. "What kind of service?" I opened my mouth, ready to answer with pride, because serving tables is honest work, and Romano's was more than a paycheck to me. But Margaret stepped in smoothly, her voice laced with false kindness. "She's still figuring out her career path," she explained, "just working temporarily in food service until she finds something more suitable." The word hung in the air like smoke, temporary, unsuitable. The conversation shifted away from me, landing on Michael's new internship at a law firm, another cousin's marketing promotion, Emma's engagement to a doctor. My attempt to contribute vanished into silence. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I pressed trembling hands against the cool porcelain sink, whispering, "Just breathe." It was my first lesson. Margaret had no intention of letting me blend in. Thanksgiving came months later. Margaret set the long table with polished silver, crystal glasses, candles flickering in the reflection of framed family portraits. We went around the table, each person declaring gratitude. Emma's engagement to Dr. Patterson earned glowing recognition. David's growing client base at his accounting practice won praise and applause. When my turn came, I said softly, "I'm grateful for family and good health." Margaret's smile was polite, her hands folded in her lap as she passed over me like I hadn't spoken at all. Then she raised her glass. "And of course, I'm thankful for Emma's future with Dr. Patterson and for David's success at work. It's wonderful to see young people establishing themselves." Her pointed omission was sharper than any knife carving the turkey. Later, as I rinsed dishes in the kitchen, Patricia joined me, her voice gentle but weighted. "Margaret just wants the best for David, dear. Have you thought about going back to school? There are so many opportunities for women willing to improve themselves." Her advice wasn't innocent. It was consensus. They had all spoken about me behind closed doors. My inadequacy was family conversation, my worth measured against degrees I didn't have, careers I hadn't built. Christmas was worse. Emma unwrapped a silk scarf from Margaret, her smile radiant. David received cufflinks polished to perfection. My gift arrived last, wrapped not in glossy paper, but in yesterday's newspaper. I peeled it open to reveal a book, Professional Success for Women. The message was clear. While others received love, I received homework. I laughed softly, trying to hide the sting, but inside, humiliation coiled tight. It wasn't only holidays. Each gathering became a test, and Margaret wrote the rules. At David's birthday, she organized a lavish dinner with his colleagues. The restaurant hummed with the low voices of professionals discussing markets, investments, promotions. I smiled, nodded, added small comments where I could. But when asked directly about my work, David jumped in before I could answer. "She's exploring opportunities," he said, sipping his wine without meeting my eyes, considering new directions. My silence tasted bitter. Once he'd bragged about my work ethic. Now, my very presence embarrassed him. Emma's engagement party was another arena. Her college sorority sisters, polished and confident, asked me polite questions. Margaret hovered nearby, cutting me off whenever I mentioned Romanos. "She's between opportunities," she'd say brightly, as though translating my words into something more palatable for the group. I disappeared from conversations like smoke dispersing in the wind. But it wasn't only their words, it was the glances, the raised eyebrows, the quick shifts to another topic, the way I became an object of comparison rather than a participant. And then Easter dinner. Margaret's friend Carol, retired executive, spent the meal praising her children's law and medical careers. When she turned to me, curious about my background, Margaret interrupted mid-breath. "Jennifer is considering various options for professional growth." The phrase was delivered with authority, as though she were my spokesperson. I smiled tightly, excused myself to the powder room, and cried into tissues that smelled faintly of lavender soap. Each gathering chipped away at me. Bit by bit, Margaret rewrote my identity, until even I struggled to remember the woman I'd once been. The cruelest part wasn't her contempt, it was David's transformation. The man who'd fallen in love with my independence now avoided my eyes when my job was mentioned. His silence was agreement, his laughter complicity. Slowly, he aligned himself with her narrative. By the spring of our second year of marriage, I was no longer a wife fighting for acceptance. I was a project, an embarrassment to be managed. And yet, despite the hurt, I clung to hope like a child clings to a tattered toy. I told myself Margaret might change, that one day she'd see me for who I was. Each small kindness, a smile, a softened tone, felt like proof that maybe she was thawing. But shadows have a way of growing longer with time. The truth pressed at the edges of my awareness. Margaret didn't just want me diminished. She wanted me gone. I sensed it in her sharp glances, in the deliberate way she skipped my name during introductions, in the false sweetness of "dear" spoken through gritted teeth, and in the way David, my husband, had begun to share her silence. It was more than disapproval, it was strategy. And one night, the strategy would reveal itself for what it truly was, a prayer not for my success, but for my erasure. It happened on a Tuesday evening, months before my birthday dinner. I hadn't meant to overhear, but betrayal rarely asks for permission before it crashes into your ears. I'd been folding laundry in the hallway when I caught Margaret's voice drifting from the den. She was on the phone, her tone hushed, but sharp, the kind of cadence she used when she wanted her words to cut but not echo. "I keep praying he'll come to his senses before it's too late," she said. I froze, clutching one of David's shirts, my knuckles whitening around the fabric. "He deserves someone who can enhance his life," she continued, "not hold him back." Silence followed, broken only by her low sigh. My chest tightened. She wasn't talking about a job or a business deal. She was talking about me. My legs trembled, but I forced myself closer, leaning against the wall so I wouldn't collapse. Her voice softened, almost tender. "He's such a good boy. I just don't understand why he insists on dragging dead weight along with him." Dead weight, that was me. I stumbled back, pressing a hand against my mouth. Tears stung, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, my mind spiraled with images. Margaret praying not for my health or happiness, but for my marriage to collapse. For her son to leave me. For me to vanish. I slipped into our bedroom before she could notice, closing the door with careful quiet. The folded laundry fell forgotten on the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet until the fibers blurred. Her words replayed in my head like a broken record. Dead weight, holding him back. I wanted to scream. to march downstairs and demand how she dared to pray for the destruction of her son's marriage. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in silence, drowning in the ache of knowing the war I'd been fighting wasn't about acceptance anymore. It was about survival. When David came home later, I searched his face for answers. Had she already told him? Did he secretly agree? He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly, loosening his tie, his phone buzzing with messages. I asked about his day, his clients, the dinner meeting that had run late. He answered with the distracted warmth of a man who believed nothing was wrong. I almost asked, "Did your mother call you deadweight too, or just me?" But the words died in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Do you think I'm enough?" David paused, frowning. "Enough for what?" "For you, for us." His confusion seemed genuine, but he didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, my heart broke a little more. "Of course," he said finally, but his voice was soft, uncertain, like a man speaking out of obligation rather than conviction. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while his breathing deepened into sleep. I wanted to believe him, but Margaret's words had carved too deep. Dead weight. The next weeks were a blur of small humiliations that suddenly felt heavier. David corrected my grammar in front of friends. Margaret dismissed my attempts at conversation with a patronizing pat on the hand. Emma snorted when I mentioned trying new recipes at Romano's. Each act alone was small. Together, they were a chorus of dismissal. I tried fighting back in subtle ways. I started wearing brighter lipstick, bolder dresses. I forced myself to smile at family dinners, to speak louder when ignored, to remind them I was there. But the louder I became, the more invisible I felt. One night, after another dinner where Margaret praised everyone but me, I confronted David. "Why don't you defend me?" I asked, my voice sharp. He blinked, taken aback. "Defend you from what?" "From her. From the way she talks about me like I'm some mistake you haven't corrected yet." His jaw tightened. "She's just worried about me. About us." "Worried? She wants us divorced." His eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." And there it was, the phrase that always shut me down. Overreacting, emotional, sensitive. I was every stereotype they wanted me to be, every reason to dismiss my feelings as invalid. But I wasn't imagining it. I'd heard her prayers with my own ears. That night, after David fell asleep, I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit my face as I stared at job boards, scrolling through positions I wasn't qualified for. Insurance companies, administrative offices, banks. Every listing seemed to demand a degree or years of experience I didn't have. Still, I created profiles, uploaded my flimsy resume, and pressed send again and again. Each application was like throwing a paper boat into a storm, hoping one might survive. I stayed up until dawn, rewriting cover letters, inflating my restaurant experience into business jargon, managed multiple client relationships simultaneously while maintaining satisfaction ratings. It sounded impressive, but it was just me, balancing orders and remembering who wanted extra Parmesan. As the sun rose, I realized I wasn't fighting for a job. I was fighting for my existence. Margaret wanted me erased. I needed to prove I was unerasable. But even in my determination, fear gnawed at me. What if she was right? What if David really did deserve someone else, someone more polished, more professional, more enough? I stared at his sleeping form, his face soft in the pale morning light. He looked like the boy Margaret described, good, deserving. And I wondered if I was the weight he was too kind to drop. The thought hollowed me. By the time he woke, I'd hidden my laptop, tucked away the rejections already trickling into my inbox, and forced a smile. But inside, I carried the echo of Margaret's prayer. She wasn't asking God to bless me. She was asking him to break me. And maybe, just maybe, he was listening. Rejection has a sound. At first, it's a polite ding in your inbox, a cheerful thank you for applying. Then it's the silence of no reply at all. And after a while, it becomes a roar in your head, repeating the same message in different words. Not good enough, not qualified, not wanted. That roar followed me for months. I poured myself into applications, staying up late to craft cover letters that tried to turn waiting tables into corporate speak, managed high-volume client relations, coordinated complex service delivery. I thought if I dressed up my life in the right words, someone would believe I belonged. But the first interview ended before it began. The hiring manager at a dental office receptionist job skimmed my resume for less than a minute before sliding it aside. We require candidates with medical office experience, she said, her lips already pursed with dismissal. The second was worse. An insurance company rep glanced at my high school diploma, raised her eyebrows, and said, "We're looking for applicants with college education." By the end of that week, my inbox overflowed with carefully worded rejections that all meant the same thing. You are not enough. Each one chipped at me, but I told David anyway, hoping he'd see how hard I was trying. He rubbed my shoulders, sighing. Maybe you're aiming too high, too fast. There's nothing wrong with starting smaller. He thought he was comforting me, but his words echoed his mother's tone. Lower your expectations. Stay in your lane. The following week, I walked into Henderson Insurance for what I prayed would be my breakthrough. The building gleamed with glass and marble. Women in sharp suits clicked across the lobby, briefcases in hand, voices strong and confident. I stood there in my best dress, suddenly aware that my shoes came from a discount rack and my purse was fraying at the edges. Mrs. Henderson herself interviewed me. She looked at my resume, expression flat. Your background is quite limited for this position, she said. We typically hire candidates with business degrees or insurance experience. What made you think you'd be qualified for account management? I tried to explain my customer service skills, my ability to multitask, my eagerness to learn. She glanced at her watch mid-sentence. Perhaps you should consider positions more aligned with your current skill set. That was her polite way of telling me to go back to Romano's. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I pulled over once, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. If Margaret wanted me gone, I would prove her wrong by becoming the professional woman she claimed David deserved. So I enrolled in community college. Nights after my shifts, I sat in classrooms with working adults chasing promotions. I signed up for Introduction to Business, Basic Accounting, Professional Communication. Tuition drained what little we had in savings, but I told myself it was investment, not waste. The first night, I felt like an imposter. My classmates spoke confidently about corporate policies and marketing strategies. I sat quietly, clutching my pen, hoping no one would ask about my background. But then Professor Martinez asked me to share a customer service example. I told a story about handling 6 tables during a Friday dinner rush, memorizing orders, calming a furious customer whose meal had been delayed. The class listened. They nodded. They asked questions. For 3 hours each week, I felt seen, capable. But at home, it was different. David frowned at my class schedule. Are you sure this is worth the time and money? Maybe you should focus on getting a job first, worry about education later. His concern sounded practical, but it felt like another vote of no confidence. At Romano's, my exhaustion showed. Late-night studying left me sluggish during shifts. Customers noticed. So did Mr. Romano. One quiet afternoon, he pulled me aside, his weathered face kind. You seem troubled lately, Jennifer. Everything okay at home? I wanted to tell him everything, that my husband's family was dismantling me piece by piece, that my nights were filled with rejection letters and tears. Instead, I smiled weakly. Just stress. Maria, the head cook, became my refuge. She'd worked there 15 years, supporting 3 kids on her own. She recognized the red eyes, the forced smiles. During breaks, she handed me coffee without a word. Education is good, she told me one evening, wiping her hands on her apron. But don't let anyone make you ashamed of honest work. Her words sank into me like a balm. Then there was Tony, the youngest waiter, barely 20. He'd catch me looking defeated and say, You're the smartest person here, Jennifer. Those companies don't know what they're missing. His boyish optimism was clumsy but genuine. They didn't see me as failure. They saw me. At home, though, bills piled up. Tuition, textbooks, interview clothes, gas for long drives to interviews that ended in rejection. All of it strained our budget. David started questioning every purchase. Do you really need another dress for interviews? What's wrong with the one you wore last time? We argued in low voices at night, careful not to let Margaret hear through the thin walls when she visited. But she knew. She always knew. And her satisfaction showed in her carefully veiled smiles. By the spring semester, my grades soared, A's across the board, but job rejections kept coming. Insufficient experience. Candidate with more advanced degree preferred, not the right fit. Each email was another nail hammered into my resolve. One evening, after a brutal rejection from Coastal Bank, I sat alone at the Romano's break table, head in my hands. Maria slid a plate of pasta in front of me, still steaming. "Eat," she said firmly. "You need strength." I laughed through tears. I'm starting to think Margaret's right. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this world. Maria's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare believe that. People like her build walls to make themselves feel tall. You climb. That's who you are." Her words lit a small flame inside me, weak, flickering, but not gone. Still, every night when I came home, Margaret's shadow loomed larger. Every rejection proved her right in David's eyes. Every failed interview became another brick in the case against me. And yet, even in my darkest moments, I whispered a vow to myself. If she wanted me erased, I would fight to carve my place deeper. I didn't know then how close I was to breaking, or that the very cracks in my resolve would make room for the one phone call that would change everything. The universe didn't knock, it rang. I was at the kitchen table on a Monday afternoon, surrounded by a battlefield of small defeats, laundry waiting to be folded, a spreadsheet of job applications color-coded mostly red, a half-finished cover letter that already tasted like failure. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Lately, unknown numbers meant two things: surveys or rejections. "Hello?" I answered anyway, my voice thin. "Hi, may I speak with Jennifer Walsh?" The woman's voice was steady, warm. "This is Jessica Martinez from Grand Plaza Hotel's Human Resources." The room stilled. I sat up, a heartbeat trapped in my throat. "Yes, this is Jennifer. I'm calling about your application for our guest services coordinator role. We received it a while back, and I wanted to see if you're still open to opportunities." "Yes," I said too quickly, then tried again, slower. "Yes, I am." Something like a smile touched her words. "Great. I spent time reviewing your background, and I want to say up front, your restaurant experience stands out in the best way. People who've lived on the front lines of service tend to thrive here. You learn instincts you can't fake." For a moment, I couldn't speak. No one had framed Romano's as a strength before, only a stepping stone I hadn't stepped off fast enough. I appreciate you saying that," I managed. "We've built a training pathway for candidates exactly like you," Jessica continued. "We invest in development, cross-department exposure, leadership workshops, mentorship. It's not theory first, it's people first. That's hospitality." I pressed a palm to the table to ground myself. I'd love to learn more. We set a time for a phone interview, Thursday afternoon, when I wasn't on shift. She asked thoughtful questions about scheduling preferences and relocation comfort as if I were a person with options, not a problem to be managed. Before hanging up, she said, "One more thing, Jennifer. Your references spoke very highly of your reliability and calm under pressure." "My references?" I echoed, blinking. Mr. Romano, he was generous with praise. The unexpected kindness hit me low in the chest. "Thank you," I whispered. After we ended the call, I sat motionless, the quiet around me full of light. It wasn't a job yet. It wasn't a salary or an office or a title. But someone had peered through the fog, Margaret wrapped around me, and seen something she couldn't smother: worth. I didn't tell David. Not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because the joy felt fragile as blown glass. I wanted to hold it alone for a minute, to feel how it changed my pulse. Besides, he'd spent months angling his phone away from me with that playful secrecy. Maybe I deserved a small secrecy of my own, one that didn't bruise. I opened my laptop. Grand Plaza Hotel glowed on my screen. Polished marble lobbies, high ceilings, floral arrangements like art installations, staff in crisp uniforms, moving with practiced grace. I navigated to the careers page, hunting details, benefits, training structure, advancement track. There it was, written plainly: medical and dental insurance, educational assistance, and, my breath snagged, employee housing. Housing. A furnished apartment a 5-minute walk from the hotel. A door that didn't open into Margaret's opinion. I leaned back, eyes burning. Freedom had a floor plan. All week, the house hummed with the wrong kind of anticipation. Margaret called twice, her voice lacquered in sweetness. "You'll wear something nice, won't you? Nothing too formal. You'll want to be comfortable." Emma texted the family thread, little fireworks and party hat emojis, and David kept checking his phone like a teenager waiting on a crush. Every ping felt like a countdown I wasn't invited to read. It should have made me anxious. Instead, their rehearsed excitement sharpened my focus. If they were planning a spectacle, They didn't know I was planning one too. On Thursday, I locked myself in the bedroom for the interview. I drew the curtains to cut the glare. The call began right on time. Jessica didn't rattle off a script. She painted scenes. Tell me about a time the kitchen was underwater and a table was on its third complaint. What did you do? I talked about triage, how I stabilized what I could control, acknowledged what I couldn't, sharpened my communication so nothing fell between cracks. She asked about leadership without using the word. How do you support a teammate who's falling behind during a rush? I described the small things, quietly swapping sections, resetting silverware for them, a joke at the right moment to keep morale from slipping. Somewhere between her questions and my answers, the shame lifted. What I'd been trained to call not real experience became exactly the kind they wanted. At the end, Jessica's tone shifted, business formal but warm. Jennifer, I want to be candid. We'd like to move forward. If everything checks out on our end, you'll receive an offer packet later today. After we hung up, I sat on the floor, back against the bed. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. The email arrived 2 hours later, subject line gleaming like a doorway. Offer of employment, Grand Plaza Hotel. I clicked. The letterhead was clean, the details exact. Guest services coordinator. Starting salary, $45,000 annually. Full benefits. Employee housing included. Start date, 2 weeks from acceptance. The city, 3 hours away. 3 hours between me and the kitchen table where Margaret marked up my life with a red pen. 3 hours of road cutting a clean line through every whisper that I was temporary, unsuitable, dead weight. I printed the offer. 3 copies. One for my portfolio, one to leave in my dresser, one to carry with me, folded carefully into a plain white envelope I labeled in my neatest handwriting, for later. I practiced telling the story in the bathroom mirror, the way you practice saying your new name. I have news, I rehearsed softly. A hotel recognized what you refused to see. I shouldn't have cared about the performance, but after months of being watched, recorded, measured, I wanted the reveal to belong to me. Not for revenge, for symmetry. If Margaret wanted an audience, she would have one, only not for the script she wrote. That night at Romano's, I moved lighter than I had in months. The regulars noticed. Mr. Romano peered at me over his reading glasses. You look like you swallowed a sunrise, he teased. I smiled into the ticket printer's whir. You ever get a call that tells you you're not crazy for believing in yourself? He paused, and the kindness in his lined face made my throat tight. Every good turn in my life began with a call I almost didn't answer. Maria tapped my shoulder at the pass. Your hands are steady, she said. You sleep last night? Better than before, I answered, meaning. I'm beginning to dream in color again. Driving home, the city lights smeared into gold lines on the windshield. I kept a palm over my purse where the offer letter rested like a heartbeat. The decorated envelope in Margaret's bag felt more and more like a prop in the wrong play. I thought of the butterflies on its edges, how they tried to make venom look like a celebration. And then I thought of my plain white envelope, ordinary as napkin stock, carrying a future they could not control. Sword and shield. Poison and antidote. At home, David was in the living room, phone glowing blue across his face. Mom wants to do your birthday dinner at Romano's tomorrow, he said, pleased with himself, like he'd gifted me the idea. At Romano's? I tried not to smile too widely at the irony. Sure, that's meaningful. He looked up. Wear the navy dress. She mentioned comfort. Comfort. The word tasted of sand. Okay, I said, touching the envelope through the purse leather, as if to confirm it was still real. I'll be comfortable. In bed, his arm draped over me, heavy and familiar. He whispered, Tomorrow's going to be unforgettable. The same line he'd used before, the same promise that once felt like safety. I stared into the dark and realized I finally agreed. I set an alarm for early morning. There were small rituals to perform. Steam the dress, polish the shoes, tuck the offer letter into fresh paper so the edges didn't fray. I wanted every angle sharp. In the mirror at dawn, the woman staring back had a steadier gaze than the one who had cried into lavender soap. I pressed lipstick onto my mouth, blotted, breathed. For months I had begged the door to open. Now I held the key. All I had to do was turn it, at the exact moment they expected me to shatter. By afternoon, my plan fit together with a quiet click. I'd let Margaret present her performance first. I'd let the camera lenses drink in my face. I'd sign what freed me. And then, without raising my voice, I'd open my own envelope and read out the life no one in that family had thought I could claim. 2 envelopes would meet on the table between the chicken parmesan and the birthday cake. One meant to end me. One meant to begin me. I ironed the navy dress, humming under my breath. For the first time in a year, the tune didn't sound like survival. It sounded like a prelude. Birthdays are supposed to feel like beginnings. That night at Romano's, mine felt like a trial. The restaurant looked different when I walked in as a guest rather than an employee. The golden glow from the overhead lights seemed richer, the air heavier, almost theatrical. I smoothed my navy dress, trying to anchor myself in its fabric. David walked beside me, phone already buzzing in his pocket, and Margaret floated in ahead like she was the guest of honor. Emma trailed behind, her eyes glittering with some private joke. "Jennifer!" Mr. Romano's voice boomed across the dining room. He beamed at me, rushing over from behind the counter. "Happy birthday!" He looked from me to the others, his smile broad. "And you must be the family." Margaret extended her hand with polite reluctance. Emma gave a rehearsed smile. David's handshake was quick, distracted. "We'll take good care of you tonight," Mr. Romano promised. I nodded gratefully. He had no idea how much those words meant. Not for service, but for solidarity. They seated us in a corner booth, the one I usually recommended to couples wanting privacy. Tonight, it felt like a stage with a spotlight fixed on me. From the kitchen window, Maria caught my eye and winked. Tony mouthed happy birthday from across the dining room, giving me a thumbs up. Their support was a lifeline. Margaret unfolded her menu, pinching the laminated edge between her manicured fingers as though it might soil her skin. "I think I'll try the lobster ravioli," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She had never once complimented Romano's, but tonight she ordered the priciest dish without a blink. Emma scrolled through her phone, occasionally leaning toward David with suppressed laughter. He kept checking his notifications, thumbs flying, his eyes darting up only long enough to flash me a smile that didn't quite reach. "Are you expecting something important?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just coordinating some surprise elements," he said. He glanced at Margaret, who gave the smallest nod. A chill crept up my spine, but I forced a smile and sipped my water. The appetizers arrived, bruschetta glistening under olive oil. Margaret complimented it with exaggerated cheer, her false warmth filling the air like perfume too strong. "Jennifer," she said, folding her hands as though preparing for prayer, "I just want to say how admirable your dedication to improvement has been. You've worked so hard." Her words might have sounded kind to a stranger, but I caught the undercurrent. "Finally, we'll see the fruit of your labor, or lack of it." Emma snorted, covering her mouth with her napkin. I focused on cutting the bread into neat pieces, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Dinner carried on with forced civility. Margaret asked about my classes, her interest as hollow as her smile. David chimed in about his new clients, while Emma peppered her conversation with comments about ambitious women she followed online. Each remark felt like a needle. But I clung to my secret, the folded envelope in my purse, my shield. When the main courses arrived, Margaret leaned back, satisfaction settling over her like a cloak. David shifted his phone into position, angling it toward me. Emma mirrored him. The symmetry of their movement sent a jolt of recognition through me. They had planned this, rehearsed it. The cake appeared, carried by Sandra, one of the newer servers I had trained myself. She smiled warmly. "Happy birthday, Jennifer," she said, setting the candles in front of me. The restaurant broke into song. Regulars joined in, their voices rising above the clatter of dishes and laughter. For a moment, I almost believed this was just a birthday, just cake and music and light. "Make a wish," David said, his camera fixed on my face. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. My wish wasn't for love or money, it was for courage, to carry out the plan I hadn't told anyone, to survive whatever cruelty was about to unfold. The candles flickered out. Applause scattered around us. Then Margaret reached into her purse. The decorated envelope emerged with theatrical grace, pink paper catching the glow of the candles. Butterflies gleamed on silver edges. She held it aloft, her smile triumphant. "We have a special gift for you," she announced, voice carrying. "From all of us." Nearby diners turned to watch. Their faces reflected curiosity, even envy. To them, it looked like a family honoring their daughter-in-law with ceremony. Emma lifted her phone higher, capturing every angle. David's camera zoomed closer to my face, his breath quickening with excitement. "Open it," Margaret urged, eyes glittering. The envelope felt heavier than it should as I turned it over, fingers tracing the expensive cardstock. My pulse thudded against my ribs. This was the moment I'd seen foreshadowed in glances and whispers. I slid a nail under the flap, peeling it open with careful slowness. The paper inside was folded neatly, crisp edges aligned. The first words screamed louder than the room itself. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The world tilted, voices around us blurred. The legal header glared from the page like a spotlight. Divorce. On my birthday. In my workplace. On camera. I heard gasps ripple from nearby tables. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" The restaurant's hum dimmed to a hush, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. David's phone stayed steady, recording. Emma's expression turned gleeful, waiting for my collapse. Margaret's smile widened into victory. They wanted my devastation immortalized. My breakdown replayed at family gatherings like entertainment. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. Time slowed. The candle smoke curled upward. The applause faded, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. I wasn't being destroyed. I was being freed. Margaret's voice sliced through the silence. "Well, aren't you going to say something?" All eyes were on me. I looked down at the papers again, at the neat lines waiting for my signature, and I realized this wasn't an end they had orchestrated. It was a door they had accidentally unlocked. My grip on the pen steadied. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The pen hovered above the line. Margaret leaned forward, her hands clasped in satisfaction, expecting tears, begging, a scene worthy of the recording. Emma's phone trembled in her eager grip, already angled to catch the moment I shattered. David's camera was steady, his lips curved into a nervous smile, as though he thought this humiliation would somehow cleanse me of defiance. But instead of breaking, I signed. My handwriting flowed across the page with eerie steadiness, as if my hand already knew freedom. Gasps erupted from the surrounding tables. Margaret blinked. Emma's smile faltered. David lowered his phone, just a fraction, confusion clouding his features. "That's it?" he asked, his voice cracked with disbelief. You're not going to fight this?" I closed the folder neatly, slid the papers back into their decorated coffin of an envelope, and looked up at them with a composure I hadn't felt in months. "Thank you," I said simply. "This is the most generous gift you could have given me." The silence that followed was so sharp it cut the room in half. Margaret's eyebrows furrowed. "Excuse me?" I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the envelope waiting there, the one with no butterflies, no glitter, no illusions. Just truth. I placed it on the table beside their decorated trap. "Because while you were planning my destruction," I said, letting my voice carry, "I was preparing something else." Emma tilted her phone closer, desperate not to miss a word. I unfolded the letter with deliberate calm, the Grand Plaza Hotel crest catching the candlelight. 3 days ago, I began. I was offered a position at Grand Plaza Hotel, guest services coordinator, salary of $45,000 a year, full benefits, and housing included. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. Emma's eyes darted from the paper to my face, disbelief unraveling her smugness. David's phone slipped lower in his grasp, the red recording light still burning as it captured his own stunned reflection. I stood, holding the letter high enough for nearby tables to see. This offer recognizes what none of you ever did, that my experience matters, that my worth is not defined by your approval. A cheer broke the silence. It came first from Maria, peeking from the kitchen window, her smile wide and fierce. "You deserve this," she called. Then Tony began clapping, loud and unashamed. Mr. Romano joined, his voice booming. "To Jennifer!" Within moments, the restaurant erupted. Regulars raised their glasses. A couple at table 12 stood to applaud. Mrs. Patterson, my Tuesday regular, lifted her water in a toast. "To Jennifer and her bright future." The sound swallowed Margaret's carefully orchestrated silence. Applause, cheers, voices rising. Not for her, not for David, not for Emma. For me. Margaret's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, then something close to fear. Her plan had detonated backwards. Emma, still recording, fumbled with her phone as though unsure whether to stop or capture the family's collapse for history. Her expression twisted, realization dawning that the video would not show my humiliation, but their cruelty, forever documented. David leaned toward me, his voice low, desperate. You knew about this. You planned this? I didn't plan your betrayal, I replied, meeting his eyes. But I planned my escape. The restaurant clapped louder. I turned the job offer toward him, the official crest undeniable. This, I said, is what you dismissed, what your mother prayed I'd never have. Validation, independence, a future that doesn't need your permission. Margaret finally found her voice, brittle and sharp. Jennifer, don't be ridiculous. You can't just leave. I already have, I interrupted. The moment you handed me those papers, you freed me. Her words shriveled on her tongue. The applause softened into murmurs, diners leaning in to catch the unfolding wreckage. I let the silence linger, then tucked the offer letter back into my envelope with the care it deserved. I looked at Emma's phone, the red light still blinking. Make sure you keep recording, I said, my tone calm, almost kind. People should see the truth. How you tried to break me and how I walked away instead. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop. David's shoulders slumped. His phone now hung forgotten, the video capturing his own slack-jawed face. He whispered, Jennifer, what are you doing? Living, I said, for the first time in years. I slid out of the booth, smoothing my dress. Margaret reached out, fingers twitching to grab my arm, but I stepped aside. Don't, I warned softly. Don't touch me again. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Margaret's hand hovered in the air, her mouth opening, closing, searching for control she no longer had. Emma lowered her phone, eyes wide with something dangerously close to shame. David looked like a man who'd realized too late that his silence had cost him everything. Then Mr. Romano appeared at my side, his hand warm on my shoulder. Jennifer, he said, his voice carrying to the farthest corner, Grand Plaza is lucky to have you, but we'll miss you here. The crowd applauded again, louder, a wave of sound that drowned the family's smallness. I lifted my chin, letting the moment wash over me. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking, apologizing, bending. I was standing, steady. This, I said, gesturing to the offer letter, is who I am. Not dead weight, not a project, not an embarrassment. A woman who fought through every dismissal you threw at her and found her own way forward. And then, without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. The applause followed me like music. The evening air outside was cool, fragrant with city rain, and each step away from Romano's felt lighter. Behind me, cameras recorded not my defeat, but my liberation. Margaret's butterflies had delivered not my end, but my beginning. I exhaled, long and steady, a laugh slipping into the night. Tomorrow I would start packing. In 2 weeks, I'd be gone. The night I walked out of Romano's, I carried nothing but my purse and my dignity. The decorated envelope sat abandoned on the table, its butterflies fluttering uselessly across the surface. The pen Margaret had offered as a weapon now marked my freedom. Outside, the air smelled sharper, cleaner, like rain had just rinsed the city. I stood still for a moment, letting the cool wind brush against my skin, and I realized something that startled me. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. 2 weeks later, I stood in the marble lobby of Grand Plaza Hotel, wearing a crisp navy uniform with an elegant nameplate pinned above my heart. Jennifer Walsh, Guest Services Coordinator. My maiden name restored. My identity renewed. The lobby sparkled with chandeliers that dripped crystal light onto polished floors. Staff glided past me with practiced grace, their movements orchestrated like a symphony, and I belonged among them. Jessica Martinez, the HR manager who had called me, walked me through the orientation with a smile that never felt forced. We hired you for a reason, she reminded me. Not just because you can manage guests, but because you understand people. Don't underestimate that. I nodded, hiding the sting of old voices echoing, temporary job, dead weight, unsuitable. The staff housing was better than I'd dared imagine. A fully furnished apartment with wide windows overlooking the city skyline, white curtains swayed in the breeze, and a small balcony invited me to drink morning coffee in peace. No more Margaret's footsteps pacing outside my door, no more overheard prayers for my failure. Just silence, warm, and safe. The first week was a blur of training, guest interactions, and introductions to team members who treated me not as an imposter, but as a colleague. My supervisor assigned me to VIP guest relations within the first month, trusting that my years at Romano's had given me instincts no classroom could teach. You read people quickly, she told me. That's half the battle. For the first time, I wasn't apologizing for my past. I was using it. Each day chipped away at the residue of Margaret's scorn. The confidence I'd lost in family dining rooms returned in hotel corridors. My smile, once forced, became natural. My laugh, once suppressed, rang out freely. Guests complimented my attentiveness. Colleagues asked for my input. I wasn't invisible anymore. Meanwhile, word traveled back through mutual acquaintances. Linda, one of Margaret's country club friends, happened to stay at Grand Plaza during a business trip. She spotted my name on the staff directory and sought me out. "You're David's ex-wife, aren't you?" she asked brightly. "Margaret mentioned you worked in hospitality, but she didn't say you were in management at such a prestigious hotel." Her surprise was genuine, her respect palpable. When she left, she gave glowing feedback about my professionalism. Within days, Margaret must have heard. The irony made me smile. Her own friends were now singing praises she had tried so hard to smother. David reached out next. Text messages at first. "How are you?" Then, "Can we talk?" I ignored them. His silence when I needed him most had already spoken volumes. But he didn't stop. Messages turned into emails, then a voicemail I didn't return. "I made a mistake," his voice cracked through the speaker. "I didn't realize what I was letting go of." "It was too late. Regret doesn't erase complicity." Margaret's voice found me through the divorce proceedings. Their carefully rehearsed ambush at Romano's had become evidence in my favor. David's recording backfired spectacularly. The judge saw cruelty, premeditation, humiliation. No alimony, no shared assets, no leverage. Margaret's gift had become Exhibit A against them. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory was quiet, steady, absolute. At Grand Plaza, my days filled with challenges that stretched me instead of suffocating me. I coordinated last-minute wedding receptions, soothed furious guests whose luggage had gone missing, handled high-pressure events where details mattered down to the shape of the napkins. And each time I succeeded, I heard Maria's voice in my memory. "Don't let anyone make you ashamed of honest work." Those skills had carried me here. They would carry me further. 4 months after starting, Jessica called me into her office. "We're promoting you to Assistant Guest Services Manager," she said with a grin. "Your leadership potential is obvious." My salary increased to over $50,000. My responsibilities grew, and my belief in myself finally matched what others saw. Margaret must have heard. Her silence was louder than her scorn ever had been. Emma's social media, once filled with passive-aggressive posts about ambitious women, fell quiet whenever my promotions made the news in local business journals. David tried again, sending a LinkedIn request this time, thinly veiled as professional networking. I declined. Their absence didn't hurt. It felt like healing. One evening, standing on my apartment balcony with the city glittering below, I thought back to Romano's. To the night Margaret unveiled her envelope like a magician revealing her trick. To the cameras ready to immortalize my humiliation, to the way I signed in my name and turned their weapon into my liberation. I realized something profound. I hadn't just escaped them. I had outgrown them. Margaret had spent years insisting I wasn't enough. But here I was, more than enough. Stronger, sharper, independent. And for the first time, I didn't wonder what she thought of me. Because it didn't matter. What mattered was the team that respected me, the guests who trusted me, the mentor who believed in me. What mattered was the woman in the mirror, no longer shrinking to fit a family's impossible standards, but standing tall in the reflection of skyscrapers. The gift they had meant to break me had instead set me free. And I wasn't done rising. 18 months after the night of the birthday ambush, I stood in my corner office at Grand Plaza Hotel, the city skyline stretching wide beyond the glass. The sun was setting, tinting the horizon in streaks of copper and violet, and the reflection staring back at me was a woman I hardly recognized. My nameplate read, Jennifer Walsh, Guest Services Manager. My salary exceeded $60,000, my team numbered 12, and my decisions carried weight in boardrooms I once thought were reserved for people born into privilege. The girl who once cried in Romano's powder room with lavender-scented tissues was gone. In her place stood someone who had clawed her way past humiliation, rejection, and cruelty. The promotion ceremony had been only a week earlier. I still remembered standing on stage, lights hot against my skin, as Jessica Martinez introduced me. Jennifer has demonstrated not just skill but resilience. She has turned experience others dismissed into strengths that inspire our team. Applause filled the ballroom. Not polite applause, but genuine, thundering, celebratory. Colleagues clapped. Executives nodded approval, and I felt pride course through me in a way I never had before. In the audience, I noticed a familiar face, Linda, Margaret's country club friend. She approached me afterward, her voice tinged with awe. Margaret never mentioned this. She gestured to the award in my hands. She said you worked in hospitality, but she didn't say you were running an entire department. I smiled politely. Some stories aren't told because they don't fit the narrator's agenda. Linda chuckled, her eyes twinkling. Well, people are talking, and they're impressed. I didn't ask whether Margaret had heard. I knew she had. Word travels fast in the circles she prized more than her own family's happiness, and I suspected each compliment from her peers stung her more deeply than any words I could offer. David tried again, of course. First through social media messages, then an email full of regret. I miss you. I didn't see what I had. I want to talk. But the boy Margaret called her good son had sat silently while she dismantled me piece by piece. His regret was a shadow of the man he could have been. I didn't answer. My apartment at the staff residence had become a sanctuary. I filled it with reminders of my growth. Business textbooks from my college classes, framed photos of my team celebrating successful events, small gifts from guests who appreciated kindness in moments of stress. I no longer looked for Margaret's approval in shiny packages under a Christmas tree. My life was decorated with respect earned, not begrudgingly given. And yet, sometimes at night, I thought about that envelope, the one with pink butterflies and silver lettering, the one Margaret had chosen so carefully, as though cruelty deserved a beautiful frame. I realized it had been the truest gift I'd ever received, not the divorce papers themselves, but the clarity they forced. That night at Romano's, as I signed my name, I understood something Margaret never intended me to learn. I didn't need their approval to exist. I didn't need to contort myself into someone else's definition of worthy. The moment she tried to erase me, she made space for me to rewrite myself. Her weapon had become my key. The irony still made me laugh sometimes. Margaret had prayed for my destruction, but what she delivered was liberation. She had expected me to beg, to collapse, to cling. Instead, she handed me the freedom to leave, and I took it. Jessica once asked me over coffee, "What motivates you the most, Jennifer?" I paused, considering the polished hotel lobby, the satisfied guests, the steady paycheck that erased years of financial strain, and I answered honestly, the fact that I know exactly what it feels like to be erased, and I'll never let anyone else feel that way under my watch. Because of Margaret, I became the manager who listens to the quietest voice in the room, who notices the new employee trying to prove themselves, who values effort as much as polish. Because of Margaret, I found the fire to rise. One evening, standing at my office window, I wondered if she ever replayed the video Emma had recorded. Did she watch her triumph dissolve into silence as the restaurant applauded me? Did she notice how her carefully chosen envelope became a prop in someone else's story? I would never know, and I didn't need to. All that mattered was the skyline before me, the team behind me, and the steady heartbeat inside me. Margaret had given me divorce papers, but hidden in that gift was something far greater, a chance to become myself. And that, I thought as the city lights flickered awake, was the truest gift of all.